Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Not Only Running podcast. This is episode number 39, and welcome. Today, I am joined by our fellow coach, Sarah R. And with Ramadan being less than 2 weeks away, we thought it was only appropriate to discuss all things Ramadan during this podcast. We kick off looking at what the research has said and is currently saying over the past couple of years. We then look at our own experiences during the holy month of Ramadan, where Sarah practicing, myself not practicing, but living in a country that is pretty much geared towards Ramadan during that holy month, where your experience is that. And wonderful, it is challenging, it is as well. We also share our tips and tricks for all of those practicing and hopefully looking to maintain their running journey throughout the month and what you might want to consider. Great podcast, lots of information. Hope you enjoy. Hello, Sarah. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Jill?
Welcome back on the podcast. I've already done our little introduction, so we'll get straight into I say meat and potatoes. I like that I used food there because it's very apt in what we're talking about today in our podcast. So today's podcast is all about Ramadan. We are, I think, just around about under 2 weeks away. It is, or 13 days, 13 days. I believe it's on Monday the 11th. It's due to start. And I was saying to you just in the beginning that I think I have been doing a podcast for about the past 4 to 5 years on Ramadan. And I think the only thing is changing is some more research that is coming out and pretty much just saying the same things. So if you have been listening over the past couple of years, there might be a little bit of repetition, but I think like most things, even in training and health, you kind of need to hear the same things over and over and over again until they are better cemented in your head.
Refresher.
Bit of a refresher. So guys, again, as a welcome into the podcast. Obviously, if you are practicing Ramadan, this first little blurb mightn't be too applicable to you, but for anyone who is not practicing or are not overly familiar with what actually happens during Ramadan, so fasting is one of the five fundamental pillars of Islam, and it is mandatory for all healthy adult Muslims to fast, and that fasting starts from sunrise up until sunrise for a period of 28 days. And that fast means that there is to be no food or water or smoking. It needs to be abstained from for that whole duration. And there are certain exemptions from that during the month as an adult, but the general rule of thumb is that most people will conduct the whole month as planned. And like with anything, when you're fasting or when there's any changes, we do expect to see some type of changes within the body, whether they're physiological, metabolic, or even spiritual. And there has been a body of research carried out to say that that does actually happen. But we are a running podcast. Well, sometimes not only running, but we are a running podcast. And we're just going to kick off. And I have had a bit of a dig around, I was telling you, on PubMed to see what is there any specific research carried out on runners during the month of Ramadan, and it was very few. It was all more sort of like soccer players. Notoriously, the research is carried out on males. So if you are a female listening, sometimes it's not given an accurate representation of what's going on, but that's another podcast in itself in terms of how females are represented in the research world. But as a general rule of thumb, in the month of Ramadan, there has been no real significant um, findings to say that running performance in terms of endurance is negatively affected during the month. And I say that quite loosely because that obviously comes with lots of little nuances at the side, because there are probably a lot of other things that are prioritized more during the month to ensure that performance is not affected. And we'll have a little chat about them. But as a general rule of thumb, just to kind of debunk any myths or fallacies, or maybe even some, fears in your own head that just because Ramadan is coming doesn't mean that you're going to lose all your fitness. It doesn't mean you're going to pack on all the pounds. Again, that all comes down to the choices that we make and how we're preparing for the month. You've probably been practicing Ramadan for a very long period of time. It should be no surprise what it feels like. However, the plans that you put in place will massively affect the outcome of that. So that's just a little bit of a background. And as always, I will just pop in the research papers that I've, that have looked at in preparation for this here. And it kind of just as a summarize to say that no real significant effects happen during Ramadan to your running performance, whether you're a runner or a handball player or a soccer player, which is other ones are coming, because that was all based on running related performances as well. Um, so that part aside, let's get into our own personal experiences, because I moved over in 2009 to Saudi. My first Ramadan was in September time. Can you imagine? Uh,
Wow.
that was mad. Again, for those that don't know, Ramadan does change every single year. It's normally 2 weeks earlier. So mine was in September. It's now March, March, April, May, June, July, August, September. Seven months of a difference during that time. Um, I'll talk about my own experiences with it, but I think Sarah, it would be nice for you to kind of talk through your experience or how you prepare yourself for Ramadan as a mother, as a
Huh.
family,
Yeah.
and also someone who prioritizes fitness and running and cycling and swimming, but other things and strength. And what do you do in the month? Like, do you have any golden nuggets that anyone would appreciate that maybe they don't know?
So usually, especially after becoming a mom and going into fitness, the most important thing that I've noticed that would like affected my training was the lack of sleep. So whenever my sleep routine changes, that's whenever I feel it affected my performance and even just like my overall like concentration, so to speak. So one of the things that I try during Ramadan, especially if I know that I'll be training during that time, is to make sure that I hit my macros if like on the years that I used to
Yeah,
calculate my macros. So I would make sure that I would have my protein, carbs, and even fat like spread throughout the like we can say like the eating period.
yeah,
So I would make sure that I have my protein after after I break my fast. So I would have like my like dates and water as soon as I break my fast, and maybe some nuts. I pray, and then after that, if I have an appetite, I would have like a normal breakfast.
yeah.
So I would have just my eggs or oats with like a shake or something. And then sometimes I would have like eat whatever that's served on the table, like sambusa. Who doesn't like sambusa?
I don't think I've ever had sambusa, and I've been there for 9 years. Haram.
No, I don't know. Actually, okay. Next time you have to try
I don't
some.
think I'm allowed back in the country now since I've said that. No sambusa.
Who are you, Jill?
I don't
Yeah,
know.
so I would try to keep it light.
Yeah,
And then I would train after that. And then after my training, that's whenever I'll have like my first like big meal,
yeah,
and it would still have protein, carbs, and fat. So I would try to have it more varied and make sure that I have enough water throughout, or liquids like throughout like the non-fasting period, in addition to more fiber, lots of fiber.
okay.
So that's one of the main important things. Sometimes whenever I would try to work out pre-iftar,
Yeah,
that would be a different situation. So usually my training program would be the same, whether
yeah,
it was Ramadan or non-Ramadan.
yeah,
However, if I'm training pre-iftar, that's whenever I'll shift the intensity to be lighter.
yeah,
And usually it would be just cardio. That's what I've noticed that it worked for me.
yeah.
So
Cardio before, strength training after. Yeah,
yes. So it would be like a light cardio, whether it was like a light jog, walk, but I wouldn't Like I noticed I couldn't do anything intense.
Yeah.
And then all the intensity would be done post iftar. So that's whenever I have like all that energy post iftar. So that's why I try not to have a heavy meal whenever I break my fast. So I'll be able to perform better
Yeah.
post iftar.
Yeah.
One thing we can say a tip for like we can say nursing moms, since
Hmm.
that's one of my experiences. Like I never fasted while pregnant in Ramadan because I wasn't pregnant at that time. So Ramadan would always come while I'm nursing.
Okay.
So one of the things that I noticed whenever I used to fast, that it, especially whenever they were young, and I breastfed like all my kids for over a year or a year and a half. So one of the things that I noticed is that my milk supply would go low or be affected during Ramadan.
Hmm. Hmm.
So during that time, I couldn't fast and I had to break my fast and eat
Yeah.
during.
Yeah,
So
I think it's situations like that. Like as I said, there's some, there's some situations where fasting, you don't do. So I believe if we just list them off, I think if you're traveling, isn't that right? If you're on a
yeah,
plane, you don't have to
yes.
fast.
Yeah,
If
if you're traveling, you have the option to
to
not
not
fast.
fast, yeah. I believe if you obviously if you have your period, you
Yes.
usually fast for the duration of that time. If you're pregnant, you don't have to fast. You'd mentioned that you'd obviously breastfed for over a year and a half. Now that kind of falls outside of you. So you said to me there was a 40-day period post delivery that if that fell within Ramadan, you technically didn't have to fast. Um,
Yes.
but anything outside of the 40 days, which you had experienced, you kind of just opted to not do it because obviously it was affecting what
Yes.
was happening. And I think that's, you know, I think that's definitely okay whenever you're looking, at the health and well-being of your child as well. Are there any other times? Is it what about if you're in surgery and if
Yes.
you're
So if
sick?
you're sick, yeah. So if you're sick too, you don't have to
Yeah,
fast.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so during those times, but you'll have to make up whatever days that you didn't fast
yeah.
later on during the year,
Yeah, yeah,
if you can. That's the
if
thing.
yeah. I think that's it's obviously it's interesting in terms of like from my perspective as well, just how it works. And then obviously with the making up of the days as well, it might be interesting for people that are non-practicing as well, that there are certain days in the year that are allocated for that as well. It's not just, you can't just willy-nilly pick them, I believe. Is that right?
No, you can fast whenever.
Oh, okay. I always
Yeah.
thought there was
So
I
if
guess specific days. Or
So
maybe not.
usually we have Ramadan,
Yeah.
which is like 30 or 29 days. And then during the year, it's like if there are some people following the footsteps of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he used to fast Mondays and Thursdays.
Okay, okay. So
Some
those are
people opt for that.
okay.
Sometimes there are days during, say, in Hajj time. Um,
Mhm.
there are specific days that people, if they want to fast during that time. And then if you just feel like you want to fast, you
Okay.
can just fast too.
Okay.
So,
Interesting. So I think, Sarah, if I was to look at yours in terms of like obviously um your hours of as if you're practicing Ramadan as is, nothing really should change in terms of your sleeping patterns or your day-to-day life shouldn't change. I say that shouldn't change, and I'm doing asterisks as a podcast, so you can't really see me doing the fingers going shouldn't change. Um, but I appreciate that it does, and some people do change their sleeping patterns to kind of, I'd say, minimize the time that they are fasting, and I guess everyone to themselves. But in reality, what you've just explained is obviously, you would just do the same thing, but kind of just a little bit later in the evening time. But you are still obviously having to wake up. Kids still go to school at certain times,
yeah,
so there is that window where I believe we worked it out. It's roughly around about 12 hours of fasting. So from
12
sunrise
to
till
13.
sunlight. And when you think about that, you think to yourself, well, I know like for myself, like if I go to bed at 10 o'clock and I wake up at 7 o'clock the next morning, I probably might not have my breakfast, until half nine, 10 o'clock. So technically it is a 12-hour fast, but obviously
Yeah.
I'm not functioning throughout the day. So from my perspective, and I'm going to talk about like Sarah, what you obviously explained was a little bit about your own experience and some really good insight into, if you have just given birth, and from a mom perspective, for me, obviously, I have attempted a few times to fast and it has ended terribly because I didn't prepare enough for it, and it probably the desire for me, to do it isn't as strong as, as other folk as well.
Yeah.
Um, but there are some things that I have seen along the way. There is obviously the general advice and recommendation that I would give, and then based off feedback that I'm getting and hearing, I think I've trained a lot of people that
Yeah.
have practiced the month of Ramadan. So I've kind of taken tidbits. And I guess if I was to give kind of like my summary of what I would say to any athlete that I would be coaching during that time is that it's the same every year, technically, with the exception of different periods of time of fasting and that window, but and temperatures. But so that's definitely a big one. But I think if you know well enough advance that this time period is coming up, and you're my age, you have experienced a lot of Ramadans, like how you feel during that time. And then knowing that it's about trial and error. And I think that's the biggest thing. Everyone's Ramadan experience in terms of how they train, how they feel, what works for them, do they exercise before or after, is all very much based on experience. I think you're right in saying some people only want to train before iftar because that's all they've been used to. Some people can't and they have to do it after. And I say that if you know what that looks like, then that is a really good starting point and how you can build your routine in and around that. So I think if we take those two examples, and if you are a pre-iftar trainer, um, that's not to say that you can't do anything or everything has to be very, very low key. I do definitely think that strength training is probably better done in a fed state. Um, However, if that intensity is low and there's not another time that they can do it, then as long as it's kept pretty simple, light, and low key, and they're eating very, very close to when they're breaking their fast, and they're breaking their fast immediately. And like you said, they're getting in everything that they need sort of during that period of eating, then that should be fine. There shouldn't be any massive adverse effects to that. Now, if they were saying they were training at midday and they weren't eating until, I would say, then maybe that is a bit of a cause for concern, okay? Because you really haven't, taken on the fuel in that, when you say that post exercise window of opportunity to kind of like replenish things as well. But I would say, so if you're doing your strength training, I would do it after iftar if possible. If not, before iftar, and maybe for that month, you're looking at maybe more of an endurance style training rather than, I'm staying away probably from like anything super complex because people are cognitively challenged before iftar, I'd say.
Yeah.
Um, Definitely not set up for like I would say maybe explosiveness, high intensity work, maximal strength. That probably would be better done after.
Yeah.
When you're running, I think it's actually a very good time if you are training just before. One, you can really, really benefit from, that fasted low intensity base building type training where the rest of the year, I know when I program an easy run, it's probably not easy, but during Ramadan, it's probably the main time when people do train easy because they totally aren't able to, to push it. So I would say if you are doing it before, I would be keeping, like you said, keeping them relatively easy. If you find that once you've kind of got into the swing of things in Ramadan, especially after those first 3, 4 days, you can play around with a little bit of intensity, but nothing too much, and nothing that you haven't been used to outside of your training during Ramadan. But priority to do it as close to breaking the fast as you can and fueling thereafter,
Yeah.
100%. And obviously just paying attention to what's happening. Sometimes if it's not happening, don't be afraid to pull it back, etc., etc. Um, for the pre-iftar trainer as well, I would be saying prioritizing taking on fuel just before the Fajr prayer, because that is your last time that you're going to be able to eat. Now that might be a little bit difficult because you're having to, or maybe not because obviously you're waking up to pray, but
Yeah.
make something the night before, stick it in the fridge. It doesn't have to be, like a four-course meal that you're sitting down to. It can be, this is where you're prioritizing, protein. So protein, slow digesting carbs and fats so that you're kind of keeping the blood sugar levels pretty stable, rate of absorption slower, more controlled, and more of a sustained energy release throughout that period of time. And then obviously taking on your last bit of water and electrolytes. And, there probably is, should be enough to kind of see you through, but as long as you're fueling immediately after.
Yeah.
Um, and that's pretty much the advice that I would give the people that I'm coaching as well, is to do that. If you don't do that, then your fasting has just got considerably longer, and that pre-iftar training session is going to be miserable, probably.
Yeah. So one of the things that like the advice that we have like during so the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he would advise us that we try to keep like the last meal closer to iftar, I mean closer to Fajr prayer.
Yes, yeah,
And then as soon as like sunset is or done, that's whenever we try to eat as fast or not to delay breaking our
yeah.
fast.
Yeah. So really capitalizing on that window of opportunity,
Yeah.
when you can and when you can't eat. Yeah, 100%. It makes sense, especially if you are training before the iftar.
Yeah.
And if you're training after iftar, I'd say like there's nothing really that needs to change too much. Now, I would say that obviously if you're a morning time exerciser, it might be difficult, and I put my hand up and be like, it's very difficult to transition through to evening times. But, that's why I normally allocate like the first 2, possibly even 3 days of Ramadan where I keep people's training peaks blank. And I'm like, there is no stress or pressure to do anything in these first 3 days because your sleeping pattern might change, your eating window has changed. A lot of things have changed, and that change creates stress. And the last thing I want to do is add more stress by expecting you to be able to do this, that, and the other, especially if you've come off caffeine and you're feeling crap. And so I normally leave the first 3 days blank and then pick things back up again and then have it gradually easing into it. And then once you're like 5 or 6 days into it, if you've set up that routine and you're doing, you're nailing your nutrition, you're getting all the water in that you need, you've got your plan, you've put in your social obligations as well enough in advance, because socializing is a big, big thing. I appreciate that as well. But making sure that, you can train and do everything at the same time, then you should be on to a winner. It's grand. There shouldn't be a massive change to that. And that's what I would always recommend to anyone that I'm coaching. But the evening time exercising is a little bit challenging. I must admit, especially I find it difficult whenever, because obviously my schedule had to change, and I was teaching. My first year I was teaching spin classes at midnight and like literally sticking pins in my nose. Like, why am I here? And I remember one time, I remember so vividly. I remember this memory. I remember looking at the clock and I seen 10 past 12, and I'm like, is it in the daytime or is this at nighttime? I'm like, I don't know. I actually felt like I kind of felt like a little bit drunk. Like I was just so dazed and delirious for like the first week of my first Ramadan. But bear in mind, I was doing, working morning
More.
time evenings, and
Yeah.
it's very challenging as a non-practicing person, especially in a country that it is just 100% switched on for Ramadan. It is tough, and because like obviously we're not eating or drinking, during the daytime either, or at least in front of people. And if you're
Yeah.
teaching something like that, there, like you have to be quite mindful of that. You don't want to be, slurping down in front of people. They'll be like secretly hating you. But yeah, it's just little things like that there to take into consideration. But kind of went off on a tangent there. But if you're exercising in the evening time, you don't really have to worry too much about changing up things. I would just make sure that you're optimizing as soon as that fast can be broken, you break it with as normal as food as you can. If you need the exercise straight away, then probably things like your dates, your liquids, take nutrition with you on the run. So things like gels can be great, or bananas, something simple, simple, simple. get your run done, get your strength training done, and then as soon as you're done, you're getting in all of the food that you need.
Yeah.
Not all samosas, just normal food. And
Normal.
yeah, and lastly, just setting up a sleep schedule that you know is going to work for you.
Mhm.
Yeah, those are my tips that I say this tell most people every year. Um, I think most people think that they need to reinvent the wheel every single year because Ramadan seems to be different this year, but in reality, it's
Same.
not. It's the same.
Yeah.
I think you get a little bit stressed and freaked out about it just before, but as soon as you're into the thick of it, it's like it's actually a really nice time. It's a lot more chill. People,
It is. It is more chill in some ways, but then a bit hectic in other ways. Sometimes, like when you have social gatherings,
yeah,
or even if you need to run some errands and everyone's running their errands at the same time. So that
like
could
do
be
your errands before iftar. It was the best time to go shopping ever.
actually no, actually the hour before
Yes,
iftar is the worst time to leave
it
because
is.
everyone's just driving recklessly. I don't know why, but
Cognitive function they're gone. People are just in a sea of
I think it's like
delirious.
mostly, I don't know, from my perspective, I think mostly it's people who are like smokers and
Maybe that's tough though.
yeah.
Yeah. Moral
So
of the story is just don't smoke and run instead. Yeah. If you're a smoker listening to this, now is the best time probably to actually give it up.
yeah,
Really an easy time. I actually didn't think of that. It is actually a very opportune time for anyone who's thinking of giving up. It's like Ramadan. It's like, hey ho,
yeah.
there we go.
Actually, I know a couple of people who took
Give it up.
that opportunity and yeah, and it worked well for them.
Yeah,
So
fair enough.
kudos to them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, my
Let's
tip is
go your
for
tips.
like I've noticed there are some people who don't have a big appetite during Ramadan.
Yeah.
And I noticed a couple of girls who I worked with didn't have that. So that's whenever, and at the same time, they fear that they will lose their gains
Mm,
during Ramadan.
yeah.
So my tip for them is just try to eat whatever you can. And at the same time, you can minimize like the volume or the load or intensity during that month.
Yeah.
You won't be losing on gains, but even if you lose a bit here or there, you can always regain that back post Ramadan.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess loss of appetite is common, especially if you're trying to have big sit down dinners very late on in the day.
Mhm.
Because the time frame, because you don't want it, like you say, the idea is to try and go to bed as normal as possible. But if you're breaking your fast at 6 o'clock, realistically, most people go to bed at half 10, 11 o'clock. You have like literally got 5 hours to cram in your three
Actually,
three
yeah,
meals
so
a day.
so with that, usually people who sleep early would push their sleep time from 10 to 12.
Yeah, yeah, give you more time for
Yeah.
your three
But
meals,
then
socializing life.
And then they'll need to wake up again. Some people do wake up again pre-Fajr time
Yeah,
just to have that light meal and then
definitely. Yeah,
pre-Fajr. And some people, like me, sometimes I would just have to stay up until Fajr time just to make sure that, especially my daughter has been fasting for the past year. So, I just want to make sure that everyone, or especially her, that she wakes up and eats well before
or
Fajr time. So we just make sure that we just, yeah. Uh, So we just have that meal, pray, and then go to bed.
yeah. You can't see this. We
Participating.
have a little baby just come into the picture. I feel like Nal is always bombing my my photos,
Now, now
and
it's
now
bad.
Tara's bombing his. Yeah, I think we need to. I think this would be the cover picture for the
Say cheese.
done. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed this Ramadan. I know there was a lot of talking and own personal experiences, but at the end of the day, I just think don't sweat it. Plan, speak to a coach for your training. If you're working with a coach, they should be well versed on what to do, and there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Um, and just enjoy the month for what it is. Like I said, it's 4 weeks. It is change. Just relax.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, until next time, guys, I hope that you have a wonderful day ahead and I'm gonna say a happy Eid, but it would be a Ramadan Mubarak.
Yes. Ramadan Mubarak.
Still got it. Okay, Sarah, thank you.
Got it. Thank you for having me. Have a great day. Bye.